I am Jim Hasik. I'm a senior fellow here in the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University, and we're going to talk about workforce issues during the COVID-19 pandemic. Excuse me. We're a panel. It's a pandemic. I'm a little tired. I was telling people earlier, I'm quite literally wearing my Northern Virginia hat today. It's a little Virginia outline where the O goes. You can actually get these through the George Mason University bookstore. I'd like to put in that plug. We have talking today Kathy Albarado of Helios HR, who's been in the business of providing HR services to government contractors quite a long time. We have Michael Sanders, the CEO of the firm Interactive Government. You can tell us more about what you do as we get going. And Misty Cedano. And Misty, I think you're the head of the acquisition.
Yes, sir.
Way to describe it. Good. Okay. We've heard two previous panels, people talking quite a bit, in both our plenary and our discussion about contract performance. Well, it's actually talking a lot about the workforce. And in some of our prep meetings, the moderators talked about that, and we decided, nope, this is a great idea. Let's have people talk in advance about this, because what we're all doing ourselves, having a conference like this, doing our work this way, has affected all aspects of business. But now we're going to drill down. We're going to try to talk about workforce exclusively, specifically, and once more. We want to try to figure out, as we're talking here, how much of this, how much of this remoteness is going to be how long lasting and how far afield it's going to spread with lasting effect, that is. What the implications are for firms, for HR organizations, for talent management, for workforce development, and then also for government at a higher level, which is to say both the federal government and regional governments, the local and state level here around the federal capital region. What should they be concerned about? Should they be concerned? What should they be concerned about, if so, and what should they do about it? So let me start off with this question. If we could try to inventory it from a human resources or a talent perspective, what just happened? In other words, tell me, if you could, maybe we go to Kathy first. What are the salient things that we've learned over the last 9 months about working remotely in a crisis, an emergency situation?
I'm glad you narrowed it down, because what just happened is a big question.
Sure. Tell me about the things that you think are most important.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity to answer the question. So we are in, this sounds so redundant, and it is obvious, but really unique times, right? So the pandemic started the conversation, or pushed us into, I think, needing to do something different. So a lot of organizations have been able to pivot, lean on their technology, operate 100% remotely, and continue to move on. Others struggle with that. Others require essential personnel to be on site, obviously. People that require significant clearances have to be set up in SCIFs. So it's treated people differently based on their industry and whether they're considered essential or non-essential personnel. What we're experiencing in this remote environment is a lot of organizations have been able to pivot. And from a talent perspective, it's been working for a lot of organizations, especially professional services firms. Government contractors are finding this unique freedom, I think, in having their people be able to work remotely. And what will happen going forward is that the talent, we're still in the middle of a talent war, and talent will look for employment opportunities where remote work continues to be available to them. And they're making having those conversations and selecting those employers now. And our firm, part of what we do is we have recruiting consulting and a number of recruiters on our team. Our recruiting practice area has exploded in the last 2 years because of the need of strong talent. And candidates are asking what decisions employers and leaders are making around during these uncertain times. And they're choosing not to participate in interviews if they're told that they will not have any flexibility. And so they're looking for a lot of flexibility. So that's just one thing, is keep in mind that talent will expect to have an opportunity to work remotely and continue that focus. And some people may expect it for an indefinite period of time. We are seeing a lot of our clients opening in stages. And many of them are saying that they're not going to require their employees. They won't even consider requiring their employees to come back into an office before January of 2022. So it's a range that we're seeing in spaces, depending on really what the leadership team believes in strongly and the specific conditions of their employees on their team. I will say, as a reminder, and something for our viewers to give consideration to, is the decisions that leaders are making today are the decisions that are going to define their culture and their employment brand going forward.
January 2022, I think, is the furthest date out that I've heard so far, but that date seems to keep getting pushed, right? I mean, on the previous panel where Jim from Detroit was telling us about how, well, yeah, back in May, I was hearing from General Dynamics about their return to the office plans, and those just kept getting pushed back. I've heard, of course, this summer, next winter, that would be remarkable for the duration for which folks would be remote. Let me ask, I don't know, perhaps Michael, if you've got some thoughts about this. You know, with massive remote work that is to say, for so many people for so long, should we expect something different in several years, or maybe not?
I'm sorry, you froze for part of that question. But
wow.
I think
apologies. Yeah, I think
that?
we have an unstable connection. Apologies for that. I was saying, should we expect that should we expect different results in several years? Kim Harrington was saying on an earlier panel that, we think we understand what's going on now, but in 3 years, will there be effects that we hadn't expected to see? I ask you because I think that you have some experience with this over time.
Yeah, so I think some of the things which have been brought up but maybe not seriously considered is some of the more soft skill type things that may be affected in terms of always being behind a screen instead of looking in someone's face, or shaking someone's hand. You can go back to the early 1900s when they talk about studies of babies that don't get love, right? And they can literally die from not having affection, right? And so I think the long-term effects of this is not something that we'll know for quite some time, because I think the additional stress that you just feel across your workforce, even those that are well set up, that are, have good support systems, that have resources, that are able to bring in help, whether that help is family or whether they're able to hire a nanny or, get a tutor or whatever. The disparity in how people were able to maintain the semblance of their normal lives vastly differed. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about high school kids in West Virginia sitting in McDonald's parking lots trying to go to school because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home. And you have some kids that don't have their parents don't have the money to go out and buy them a Chromebook and an extra screen and a big set of headphones and, all these things which are necessary to sort of be successful virtually. I'm sitting, behind two huge screens, and so I couldn't imagine, some kids trying to do schoolwork after their parents got home, on a mobile device, and you hear about that too. So I think that the disparity is vast in terms of impact. And I think that long term, in terms of returning to the office, I think Kathy is 100% right that A+ talent is going to want to work from where they work, where they want to work from. And, if you're if you're an outcomes based organization, that should be okay. And so, that I think there will be some pivots. As Misty mentioned on our prep call, DoD is a little slower. You have generals that like to see people in their at their seats. So I think culturally that shift will take a little slower time in some government organizations than it will in private companies. But I think overall we'll never see a 100% return to the office. I think it'll, I hate to throw out a number, but just in terms of our staff, we have about 40% of the people that have always just came to the office because they have their own office and they needed to get away from whatever their kid's dog, spouse, whatever, like you had construction at your house during our prep call or whatever. So, people would just come in randomly and, I'm not a micromanager. So when they're here, they're here. And, when they're on teams, they're on teams. And, that's kind of, trust and autonomy and authenticity are going to be the name of the game moving forward if you want to have an A+ crew.
We're going to, I'm going to get to Misty just a moment with a question. I want to do a follow-up on something actually I was going to say Kathy, but actually both Kathy, you and Michael just said. We're going to roll a poll here in a few moments if our poll coordinator just asked me about that to try to get some sense of what personal experience has been for folks who are listening in about, for your own workforce, how disruptive has this been? And, where has that impact most been felt? If you have the opportunity, please tell us what your experience has been, and we'll ask the panelists to interpret that as we go. Misty, I wanted to ask something you'd said to me earlier I want to ask about something you'd said earlier to me. Michael was saying that talent's going to work from where it wants to work from, and Kathy's been noting that, from where she sits, it's certainly we're still in the midst of the talent war within the government contracting business. I think you were telling us a story earlier about, defense can be pretty conservative about work practices. I used to work in the Defense Department and had that own experience myself, but not every federal agency is. And is that setting up competition between agencies, either for their own people or for contract talent?
Yes, actually, we've seen a large number of our folks in the Department of Defense, specifically, not necessarily in A&S. This was at the previous organization that I was assigned to. They were actually leaving kind of in droves to go to an organization pre-COVID that offered the opportunity to work for a short stint of time, which was around 3 months, on site in the headquarters office where they were being hired at. And then the benefit to that was that then they could relocate anywhere in the United States, which gave them the opportunity to check in once a month at that current location where they decided to relocate to, and then work all of the rest of the time remotely in their home. And we lost a significant portion of one of our offices to that organization because people were looking at where they wanted to be future down the road, where do I want to retire, a lot of other family and personal reasons that they decided to relocate outside of this immediate area, and that drew them away very quickly.
I do note that you work for the Defense Department, and you seem hesitant to mention which other agency that was, lest people start taking notes. That's all right. You told me earlier.
I hate to speak on behalf because I don't know personally, but I can tell you that from those folks that were leaving, it was the IRS, but from those folks, I don't know as definitive because I didn't talk to their HR staff, so I don't want it to be gospel, so to speak. But that was from the folks that were leaving our organization, yeah.
Well, I'm sure we're all equally enthused about the prospect of working for the IRS. So,
and I don't want to lose any more of our talent.
No doubt. But no, that is funny. Is that something that so has that affected the Defense Department? In other words, is that I've heard, we heard the former Defense Secretary. We've been through a few, but I think he was the penultimate one, saying that this whole work from home thing, it's working better than we thought. And at one point, one of his deputy CIOs was saying, IT issues, of course we've had some, but they haven't been massive. And yet, as I was saying, I had once a bizarre experience with a work from home problem when I was a Defense Department employee that I thought, my gosh, this seems so bureaucratized and silly. do you think that interagency competition, that sort of that interdepartmental rivalry in a sense that we talk about sometimes as an engine for military innovation, is that something we can see as an engine for organizational innovation within defense, or excuse me, within the federal government broadly?
I would say yes. I mean, even throughout my career prior to being with ANS, we've always, when you have more than one federal agency in one location, you tend to have the competition for similarly focused workforce and functionally oriented personnel. So when I worked for Navy, we had agriculture CDC. This was actually during H1N1, ironically enough. We had agriculture CDC and the Navy Medical Health Support Center. So they were all competing for the same type of skill set in their epidemiologists, right? So we constantly stole from each other, and we needed to be much more innovative in the ways that we worked as not only competitors, but as partners to make sure that the royal we was actually keeping and retaining and growing the workforce in the larger picture to support the larger needs for the federal government and the country. But we kind of needed to outline where each of our part was in that, so that it was much easier to manage those expectations and to fulfill the needs that we needed within each of our organizations.
So let me tack back to the folks who spend, either, work in industry or advise industry. Can you tell me, so suppose I have a services firm, professional services firm, and I've got access to talent, but I'm in Huntsville, or I'm in Sacramento, or I'm in some other government services hub that's a little further afield than, say, Fairfax, Virginia. And I'm interested in securing contracts that previously perhaps were somewhat restricted in that they needed to demonstrate that I had I worked on one of these ones where I had to demonstrate that I had a facility within 50 geographic miles of the Pentagon. Are there limits to how far we can go? We certainly, we have Alaska Native corporations, right? That do some great work for the federal government, but there might be a time zone issue there. Is there advantage? I think one of you were saying to me at one point that, West Virginia has some great advantages because, or certainly maybe Ohio does, you can get on an airplane and you can get to DC if you need to. Where do we think the limits are, and for how far we could go outside of our immediate area here to deliver services, and for how long that might, and if you're a firm, do you think that's something you can get behind in terms of your marketing to federal agencies?
So I'll start on that and then encourage my colleagues to add what they have. So we've got the host.
Oh yes, the poll results. Yes, let's kind of pop up like that. Let's take a moment to actually talk about those. So it's a little bit of a normal distribution, or at least a central tendency, I guess, strictly speaking, I should say that the feedback we're getting is that more people are saying that I've had some impact, but more are saying very little rather than a great deal, and that's comforting if you're interested in the the quality of services delivered, right, and the difficulty with which organizations are needing to adjust. And the question of where did you feel the impact? There was some talk on the last call about wet signatures and company seals and that sort of thing. This doesn't seem to be the number one thing bothering folks, but otherwise, I think pretty broadly, right? Wellness, we should expect that. Almost 2/3 of the respondents are saying that employee wellness and flexibility has been a big area of impact. What we're also hearing is the logical things you'd expect for training, communication, and a bit about organizational culture. Is this okay? Well, tell me. Can I go to Ohio? Can I go to Alabama? And to a certain extent, and if I can I maintain the culture I've got? Can I maintain the communication I've got? What does past experience say about all that?
Okay, so I'll start.
Question. Take what you like. Yeah.
And can I thank Michael? I really appreciate your perspective and how you led with what we see as clearly a high consideration for the people that just took the poll, right, is employee wellness. So I love that you led with that, right? And I would imagine that you have a great culture in your organization based on how you answered that question. And that's what the second highest number, actually, I didn't scroll all the way down, so maybe it wasn't just what I was seeing on my screen, but it was certainly something of consideration on what we just saw, is hiring and retaining staff, right? So I would guess that Michael has his hands on that really well because of the culture he's building in his organization. He's really intentional about it. And that's something that is more prominent today. I think it gets more focused. It's under the spotlight more. People are much more aware of it. Is if I'm going to make a decision to go work for an organization, I want to make sure that I have access to remote flexibility. Sometimes we call it max flexibility. And that I have an employer that's going to be aware that it is stressful to sit behind a screen all day. But I would say that as we're working remotely will certainly change the way we operate and think and lead in an organization and how we connect with people. And so for me, what we've been able to do both internally at Helios and also when we work with our clients is really stay. I encourage people not to give up on feeling connected to their team because you're remote, right? So for me personally, having a conversation behind a screen, even though they can be exhausting when we're sitting down all the time, but the screen and the connection, like many people invite you into their homes. That is a much more intimate conversation, intimate environment, which you get to meet their families, their pets, what's behind them on the bookshelf in the back. It just allows you to connect at a different level. So I do think that has brought some ability to be strongly connected that we didn't have in the past. I think what people miss though, ideally, and I think Michael, it was you who said this, that people want to come in, they want the human connection. And that's less about, I believe, being able to perform in a better capacity. It's really just about being to connect with colleagues that they enjoy being with. And so your question, I'm sorry, I didn't even answer it. I'm so sorry, Jim. I got distracted by the poll.
No,
your question about, where
yeah.
So people can live anywhere and work remotely from anywhere today, really. What we are seeing, however, we are seeing people pick up and leave the high cost of living areas, Washington, D.C. being one of them, and move to other more rural areas, right? And in some cases, I had shared with you on our exploratory session where an organization, we had an employee who left within one of our community. It wasn't a Helios employee, but had left and moved from our local area here to Florida, and didn't inform their employer, right, until they did kind of a change of address notice. And so that obviously has a lot of impact with the employer in how they're accounting for taxes.
You would think that in Florida in particular, he would want to tell them not to withhold, right? I mean, there's an advantage there, which is part of the reason to go to Florida or Texas, right?
But it's happening. And so what else we see is we see people's employers saying, hey, I don't care where you live. I prefer that you live within our time zone. Stay within our time zone. It makes meeting setup easier. But it's going to happen whether people allow it to or not, right? I mean, we can't dictate where our people leave. We can just dictate how we can manage how we respond to it. But again, I think that's going to be an advantage when employers are that flexible and working around that process and how that will work in different time zones. We had an employee move to Colorado during the pandemic, and it's been great. I mean, there has been no negative impact as a result of that. And if we hadn't have done that, I'm sure we probably would have lost her. So
I think that occasionally she needs to get up at 6 for a call.
Yes, she does. She does. Yeah.
I will report that I am currently working on a project unrelated to all of this with somebody in Alaska. And yes, sometimes it's extraordinarily dark when he's on that call in the morning. But I actually wonder about the time zone thing, and that I get it that, people would say, well, it helps a lot if you're in the same time zone. But I've also, I talked to somebody at a professional services firm once who told me, one of the great things we've got is that office in Auckland. Because, he told me, when we're done with something at 5 or 6 o'clock, we pass it to them. And when we get up in the morning, more progress has been made. So we've got a 24-hour cycle. Now, I don't know exactly how that works with federal contracting, if we want to, open a satellite office in Perth for the department or whatever. But the limits, I think you had suggested to me once that, you know, an hour and a half flight is maybe a good metric or something like that.
So what I had shared with you was something one of our clients was doing, which I thought was brilliant. And this was well before COVID, because the talent market is so tight in our community. This is a government contractor, so tight in our community. He said, you know what? I have a new strategy. He researched the most literate states in the United States, that were within an hour and a half flight from Washington, and then contacted like economic development authorities and talked to people in those areas and got a sense, and then started recruiting from those areas. So didn't set up an office, but started recruiting from those areas, recognizing that there was talent in higher abundance than there typically is in DC. And I thought that was this brilliant out of the box strategy, because we've got to do something different. And now our opportunity to do something different is to concede to and embrace, actually concede is a negative word, embrace this opportunity for people to work remotely.
So do I have this backwards? Actually, maybe I do. That, you know, I'm wearing my Northern Virginia hat because I'm saying, you know, I'm somewhat concerned for the region that, well, if I can decamp to Texas and whence I came before, you know, living up here, and I love Northern Virginia, but if people in general can, you know, decamp to Florida or wherever, and there's a tax advantage to doing so, and the weather's nice and I get a big ranch and whatever have you, that I would normally worry. But you're also saying that, well, the labor market's so tight for high-class jobs here in the region that, let's not worry about this so much. Actually, there's an advantage for the firms locally, and we should be happy about our firms that are local that can figure out how to spread out a bit and recruit talent from other areas. Is that maybe a better, is that a more accurate narrative than the one I was spinning earlier?
People are absolutely doing that as well. They're reaching out, and they feel, so the positive in this is now the recruiting pool has expanded. Our geography has expanded from where people are targeting candidates. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Misty, are you all, oh, I'm sorry, Michael, go ahead. I'll get to Misty in a moment.
No, I was just going to say, you know, we've been operating, you know, in every state and territory since 2015, geo-dispersed across many time zones. And there's always pros and cons, but, you know, you asked previously, what are the limits? And just as a couple examples, we had somebody on contract in Alaska that was allowed to go work in Peru with his wife, who was a physician without borders. And he was just as productive in Peru. You know, I somehow think maybe he had more IT in Peru than he did in Alaska somehow, but just because how far he was. And there was a guy that literally had to take a boat to a library to you know, to onboard. And then some other, you know, things. One of the people that I'm teaming with right now, he recently, he's a BD person, moved to South Korea and is operating from there, managing one of his company's contracts in South Korea, but doing BD here. And he basically works a flip shift where he's up from,
Wow,
you know, I think 8 at night till 8 in the morning or something. And so, you know, you asked what the limits are, and I don't think that there are necessarily limits depending on, you know, how your organization's set up and, you know, and how you drive outcomes in your organizations. I think is really the more, you know, pertinent question when you're thinking about in the future, do I want to go permanent telework? Do I want to, you know, decrease my real estate footprint? Do I want to decrease in-office staff and let people work from wherever? You know, those are some considerations, I think. And then I think, you know, as Misty and Kathy were both saying, I think, you know, emotionally, you know, you got to check in with people, you know, and see how they're doing as opposed to what they're doing. And to reiterate what Kathy said, if you've been having, you know, virtual meetings with your team for 9 months and you haven't met their kids and their dog and you don't know what their baby cries is like, and, you know, and people don't even apologize for that stuff anymore. It's just par for the course, you know, baby comes in, kid comes in. It's like, you know, so, you know, I think that we're just seeing some of the benefits, and hopefully once people are able to get together more personally, some of the some of the downsides in terms of stress and all the other things that have come along will dissipate, and we'll keep some of the good and leave the bad in 2020, hopefully.
So about 20 years ago, I briefly worked for IBM in its global services division. At the time, that was for a very long time a completely remote organization. I think the year that I was there, I was in an IBM office, 3 days out of 365 or so. Now, of course, famously, IBM retrenched from this policy back in 2017. It's something I'm talking about in a paper that I'm going to have out shortly that I shared with you all earlier on this topic. And then just this year, the CEO who put that policy in place, Ginny Rometty, the former CEO, is admitting, to Bloomberg News that, well, yeah, actually, I think that might not have been the right idea, briefing back. But, corporate cultures can be conservative, even reflexively. Government cultures can definitely be conservative. Are we talking about the Defense Department? Misty, let me ask you, it's entirely possible that the IT connectivity in Peru is pretty good. The weather's great. The time zone's right. I hear the real estate costs are pretty low. How do you feel about your contracting officers moving? What are the limits there on what we can expect, what we can expect the government to tolerate?
Well, we already work, obviously, in a global environment. So we have contract staff and acquisition workforce that are worldwide.
Well, that's fair.
So that's not too much of a stretch for how we already operate. Now, the ties that bind them to the up chain in which they report, which really does drive the work that they're actually doing, that might be the actual change in being able to manage and work that specific portfolio in a worldwide environment, as opposed to having a presence in the time zone in which the employee is also located. But honestly, just from my own perspective, increasing the localities in which we are doing our recruitments allows us to be more representative of the population of the US, of our working level population. It allows us to engage more with each of the perspectives that come from across our countries and many of our diverse communities. And so that will bring much more value to the department, as opposed to always picking from the same talent pool at the same time in the same way and ending up with kind of a cookie cutter candidate. So if we're always taking the opportunity to diversify and look for different ways to bring in different levels and different types of talent with different perspectives, and locality is definitely an easy way to do that. So this gives us just another opportunity to expand and really explore that.
I remember when I first moved to Northern Virginia for the first time, which was almost 30 years ago. I heard a little bit of a screed from a soon-to-be SES who had moved up from Eglin Air Force Base about just how insular and provincial actually this presumably cosmopolitan place can be. And I think you raise a really good point there that when we're looking for ways to increase the diversity in many ways of our workforce, targeting geography, diversifying geography can be a useful way of doing that. And then I think it's a fairly neutral way of encouraging folks from all kinds of backgrounds just because they live in all kinds of places that aren't necessarily ours. Okay, so let's talk about predictions maybe for, Kathy, you were saying you're hearing January, not this January, but a year from January. And actually I've heard a few companies I've heard announce this sort of stuff like, well, this is working out at least just fine. And I think we've got, because I was saying there are some companies that have been, at least some small ones and a few big ones like IBM for a long time, that were mostly virtual for a very long time, or have been. We've got a long literature academically, this is something I care about as a researcher, that says, yeah, this mostly works pretty well with some exceptions, and we kind of know what the exceptions are, but there's still a whole lot of unanswered questions. We're getting an avalanche of data now about remote work, and some papers are now starting to come out about what we're learning. What do you think is going to happen in 2021 across the year if we stay mostly this way, and at least by order in a sense, of a lot of our organizations. We stay that way. If the government stays comfortable with it, what's going to happen in 2021? And what should we want to happen? In other words, what should firms and maybe agencies want to do in order to try to shape that future?
So I'll start off.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start off. So in 2022 is the furthest we've heard to today,
Okay.
right? So a lot of organizations, though, were already saying 3 months ago, next fall, like let's fall. And some of these conversations were being had before there was news about the vaccine coming. So I think, though, people are waiting for the majority, if not all Americans, to receive the vaccine before they really feel comfortable going back to what our lives looked like before COVID. So that's the reality of keeping people safe. And there's still what we've talked about earlier, the reality that talent's still going to want and desire to work remotely, whether it's safe to come into the office or not. So we're seeing more organizations, in fact, we're doing this as well, who have made their offices CDC compliant, right? And safety, and followed all the safety measures, and making it available to their employees who want to come in and who are practicing social distancing, wearing their masks, all of this, and actually having a sign up. So if we have people who want to come in, we have quarantined off, so to speak. We have set it up at least a minimum of 6 foot differences for workstations and offices. So they have to sign in so we know who's going to be there and actually pick a space of where they'll be sitting, because we're being very intentional of spreading that out to keep everybody safe. So we've made it available. Very few people have taken advantage of it. Some people will do it if they're doing a big webinar and they're speaking and they want to come in and get away from the distractions at home potentially, but very few people other than in that situation are coming in. We did actually have one of our practice leaders come in with them. There were a group of new hires coming in and actually wanting to see them, and completely social distancing, and we were under the guideline. It was just a few people. So that worked out well. So in the future, I mean, you're seeing people, and I'm certainly not a real estate specialist, but what we're also seeing is organizations, leaders are either subleasing and trying to get rid of their space, or they're doing the opposite. They're recognizing that they've got to provide more space to their people because of the distancing. And so, and those that are maintaining their offices and believe strongly in bringing people back into the office are enhancing and updating their space to try and make it a more enjoyable place, or a place for people to get excited to come. So there is certainly some of that happening. And if I could just a minute, Jim, we had a question earlier. Somebody asked, what about people, we talk about a lot of remote working. What's the reality of people that live in more rural areas?
Oh, yes, that question has come in, yes.
The bandwidth connection isn't up to speed. And so what we're seeing, what we recommend is giving people MiFis so they can carry their device that they plug into their laptop or their, typically the laptop or their computer if they need to, and have access to internet in that capacity. So we're certainly seeing more of that. We've always operated in that capacity at Helios because our employees would be a combination of working remotely and on site at the clients. And we're seeing more employers saying, okay, because you're going to be working remotely, they're offering internet allowances, right? Just like cell phone allowances have been common, more internet allowances to help them support them in using their home internet as well.
Well, that might be cheaper than office space, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, to what extent, though, also, I mean, this, I'm working with a project team on something right now. As I was saying, we've got some folks in Norway. I didn't mention that. We've got some folks in Maine. Here I am in Virginia. We got the guy in Alaska. He's in the middle of nowhere, he's not exactly in Anchorage. So, and I don't think that the organization is too deeply concerned about, how he connects as long as he connects. How you set up your home office to a certain extent is how you set up your home office. Is that something, do you think we need to lend support to, or is it a little bit of a sink or swim kind of arrangement with people?
Because this seems to be going on longer term, right? It's not in the beginning, we didn't know how long it would last. People were hoping we'd get back into the office within a 3-month period of time. So it looks like it's going to be more common and for a longer period of time. So yeah, so what we did was we gave our employees an allowance and said, you use this for whatever you need to make you comfortable and more productive working from home. And some people bought nicer chairs, some people bought a printer, whatever worked for them. We didn't even ask them for receipts. We just said, we want you to use this and improve your home office. And it was very much appreciated. And we're seeing other organizations do that as well. So if it's something you believe is going to be longer term, I think that is a great benefit. And it's appreciated by employees for sure.
Michael, you have any predictions about the market?
About the GovCon market?
Yeah, well, with respect to the workforce over the next year, if we think this is going to, perhaps more will persist than we should expect will persist. But even after that, we think that I keep hearing folks say, well, there's no real going back. Is the way that I think Lou Von Thayer was putting it on an earlier panel. We hope to get back to we hope our laboratories, we can get back to more of at least a hybrid arrangement, because, at a certain point, you got to stand next to each other when you're looking at a test tube or whatever it is. But are there things that people will do that will seem, I hadn't thought about that. That's a clever idea.
I'm sure. I mean, one of the things that I thought at the beginning of the pandemic was that my hope was that it would unleash the American spirit of innovation. And I think it has. I think obviously larger publicly traded companies with all sorts of instruments were able to make that transition easier than small businesses. But I think that for the most part, the technology was at the right maturity at the right time to enable even small businesses to operate virtually anywhere in the world. As I mentioned, I've been in 90 cities in 10 countries over the last few years, and I've always been able to operate my business without hiccup virtually. And so, I think that what we'll see moving forward in terms of the market, and then this has been something that Kathy said at the very beginning, which has always been true, is it's still a tight labor market. Even at 6% unemployment, it's still tight. If you want to get a talented executive, it's almost like romance. You got to spend 6 or 8 weeks getting to know them. We do Berkman tests to ensure that the type of people that we're going to be working closely with, can magnify our strengths and not amplify or mitigate or help us mitigate some of our weaknesses. So taking that time to get to know somebody and go through that process with them has been hugely successful for us, and we've been able to make some extremely good hires from large companies because we took the time to work everything out with them and make sure that they had like I said at the beginning, the flexibility, the autonomy, to be able to work, and do what they do wherever they want to do it, as long as they're meeting the outcomes.
This, what you said about spirit of innovation reminds me of, actually, I want to say something about Misty's organization, and then I want to ask you a question, Misty, about it. I'm reminded that, or I remember that occasionally, I'm with the business school, but our school of business, but the dean of our school of government, the Shar School, occasionally has a little bit of a pay on to the actually some of the great accomplishments of the federal government that we forget about when we have fun making fun of its practices. But here is a place where innovation in government has been huge. It's been dramatic. It's been sudden, and it seems to have been highly successful to a certain extent by allowing a whole bunch of folks in government to go do what they thought was best in the fashion in which they thought it could be best accomplished. We ought to take a moment to, reflect on that accomplishment. Okay, reflected. Now I want to ask you, 2021. What are you, with the workforce spread out so far, whether that's a constraint or it's actually an enabler, everybody highly connected virtually, what are you hoping to accomplish in developing that workforce over the next year?
So some of the constraints that we have are essentially the cultural acceptance, which is something you alluded to in the very beginning of our discussion. and kind of helping both the leadership and the leaders and the employees to understand, the employees at all levels and those with the leadership role, to understand their role and how to actually accomplish that role and maintain connection between each other. I saw a question come in with regards to managing. We always talk about high performers and being able to maintain and attract excellent talent. However, when we see some challenges with performance, maybe that's due to the blending of the two personal and professional environments, or blurring of the two in some instances, or maybe they're just not performing. Maybe there's some professional or personal reason, but being able to equip our workforce to be able to deal with those as an employee and as a manager, supervisor, leader in those roles. Those are some of the constraints and some of the wins, because of course we've got some folks that are very easily able to morph right into this formation and be able to address it. And they've already been working in this kind of environment for a significant amount of time. But we have other pieces of our workforce, and we've been doing some reviews to see if these are generational, tenured, if there's something with regards to prior service, to kind of do some stratification of the data that we're collecting to see where those pockets of lessons learned and implemented and best practices are, and where we're struggling at, and who actually, by statistical analysis, may need the extra assistance to be able to address some of those and learn going forward.
And you're finding—
And I talked so long, I don't remember the other half of your question. I'm sorry.
No, I think you covered it, what you're hoping to do with the workforce. But the thing you actually decided to focus on, and that's great, was the issue about where are the constraints. I mean, I think we've talked a bit about, how technology is enabling all this. I am kind of curious about— I do want to mention we've got, I'm going to get to, before we end here, the next 10 or 12 minutes, 2 questions that have come in from folks in the audience, Ms. Griffiths and Mr. Linden. But let me a little follow up on that, if I could, Misty. You mentioned the statistics. What kind of data are you collecting? Is it something that's been enabled by this remote environment? And I mean, I'm very curious about lessons learned statistically in the workforce.
So right now we're running just an internal telework. So we've got a couple of different pockets that we're focusing on. One is just an internal conversation survey with our internal workforce to ANS, to the acquisition and sustainment community, that allows us to get immediate feedback on, are their needs being met? How are they being met? What is the delta between what they need versus what they're being provided? And so that we can start making some smarter decisions on how to make sure that we are holistically taking care of our workforce. We are also looking at data stratification just along the lines of where we're seeing maybe some non-retirement based attrition. Maybe we're looking to Michael's point about down the road for what may be happening in the 5-10 year, and maybe not knowing those implications, but looking to see if we're seeing any kind of attrition that is possibly attributed to maybe the healthcare or parenting or caregiver needs that then aren't able to be addressed within our workforce, that are causing folks to leave service so that they can become the caregiver for their homes and their families. So we're pulling a lot of that data just to see what we can see, that as opposed to only looking anecdotally at our populations and saying, well, maybe this is a thing and maybe that's a thing. But until we can actually drill down and figure out if it is a thing based on the solid data, it doesn't give us much leg to stand on to make the argument.
That's very helpful. But it's largely survey data at the moment. Is that fair?
That part is survey data, and the other part is data that we already have access to based on our position over the policy piece for the acquisition workforce.
Right. Well, let me get to the 2 questions that have come in. The quick one is about vaccine. Yes, apparently the first vaccine dose outside of maybe Russia, let's not we'll talk about that, was administered in the United Kingdom this morning, quite early here. A question from Kevin Linden about it's kind of the school question. Are we going to let the kids come back? No, we're going to let the employees come back if they've not been vaccinated. Or maybe I could riff off that question and ask, do we have a larger return to office when we think we've hit a certain level of, population immunity, whether through vaccine or other spread? Is that the metric we're looking for? What do you think that's going to be for folks? Is it condition based or compliance based?
I think you're going to try to fine line between HIPAA and HR policy. And, I mean, really, because you really can't ask. I mean, I don't really think you can ask somebody if they've had a vaccine, and so I think, at least for me, and what I've kind of thought about in terms of flexibility for the workforce moving forward was that people would come back as they were comfortable. And, we don't know what people's dynamics are at home or who they're caring for or who they're caring for is caring for. And so, and we don't really have a total understanding. We have a good understanding of the spread and how it spreads, but it's still spreading. So we really haven't figured out how to stop that spread, even though we think we know how it's spreading, right? So, I think asking people whether they got a vaccine or not is going to get you sued. I think
the basic answer is all your
well, because people are going to feel very strongly on both sides of that issue. They're either going to 100% not want it because they felt like it got rushed to market, or they're going to 100% be the first person in their neighborhood in their line,
right,
in line to get it. And so, you have to balance those people across your workforce because there's a lot of, and then you also have to, assess the risk of that, and so I think that for most of us, what we're looking at is sort of a long-term, sort of staggered return as necessary, as numbers, go down and vaccinations come up and deaths go down. And, I think it'll be a very sort of, probably one step forward, two steps back at certain points. And perhaps, eventually we'll start getting some momentum to where it's, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, 5 steps forward and 1 step back. And, and I think to Kathy's point, that'll probably be at the end of next year where we're actually back to a point where we, enough people have been vaccinated or had it and have recovered that everybody just feels comfortable, being around each other again. And who knows when that's going to be, but that's really, I think when you ask the basis of returning to work and returning to our lives, it's when do we feel comfortable being around strangers again that are less than 6 feet from us, and that'll be, and everybody's answer is different,
Everyone's answer is different. That is very clear. Although I like your metaphor for 2020, which might be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So good. Felt like that. Although I don't know, I'm dangerously close to election commentary or something like that, and I'm not. Everything looks great from where I sit. The other question we've got is work-life balance. Oh, Misty, please go ahead. You were saying?
I'm sorry. Just wanted to kind of make an emphasis or a tag on to what Michael was saying. We already have a significant number of our workforce that do require vaccines to actually do their job. And although we can't just ask everyone, have you had your flu shot or whatever, but for example, the teachers that teach in our DoD schools, they do require vaccination. Our healthcare workers that are in our, right. So our emergency workers, folks that are forward deployed in combat zones, they're already required to have these types of vaccinations and as a condition of employment. So as long as we're able to show the nexus between the type of work that is being done and the need for that type of vaccination, then although I absolutely believe holistically with what Michael started out by saying, we are very close to riding that line between HR and HIPAA. And that was my very first thought. So I was kind of chuckling to myself. There are still some instances that are definitely clearly demonstrated and justified that are on the other side of that. So we could be able to show that nexus with a larger workforce, since this is a public pandemic, and explore that in some way going forward.
For the record, I'd like to note that I'm a very big fan of vaccines. I do remember, however, when I was in the Navy a long time ago, being told, well, you know, you need to get this vaccine because you're going overseas. I said, what is it? They said, well, it's yellow fever. I said, I'm going to Belgium. Hey, it's written down, you need to get the vaccine. So I'm accustomed to, yeah, look, it's part of your job. Just do it, be quiet. The other question we have coming in is a little more sanguine about work-life balance. And I might frame it with the general observation that there's kind of a bit of some of the research we've had over the last couple of decades is that work from home is not actually a silver bullet for dealing with work-life balance issues. Kathy's nodding like, yep, that's right. People should understand that. But do we expect that, how does this go? Do you find this environment has led to more or less balance? Or maybe a better or worse balance? And also with this environment, you know, being, is it more conducive for employees, or I think they're trying to say, is it something that works better with employees who have a strong work ethic?
So I'll start with that. And I appreciate when Michael led us with this conversation about wellness and how that's important, right? How our people have increased anxiety and the uncertainty of our situation, right? And during uncertainty, people have naturally higher levels of anxiety. So working from home remotely can certainly create some of that because of what comes with that. The word balance, I think, is a misnomer because it assumes that we have it. So, and the reality is with balance, right? If you think of those scales, something always takes priority. You know, your family may take priority, your work may take priority, something in every moment has to take priority. Like the idea of balance, I think, creates its own anxiety because I don't believe it exists. I like the word integration. So work-life integration, because we're many different people when we have to be, right? We're parents, we're employees, we're leaders, we're sports coaches for our kids, we're dog owners, whatever all that is, something's going to take priority. But and the reality is, yes, I think in a remote work environment where people are working at home, it's very hard to identify and set boundaries. And so especially in this time when we're offering this max flexibility for people who have children at home that they're working full time and they're schooling their children at home, they need a tremendous amount of flexibility to do that. And so we've told our clients before school started this fall, you may see, we're giving our team flexibility. The message was supporting our team, supporting you. And we ask you to just give us grace and know that your engagement will not be impacted. You might get odd emails at odd times. And we will still get the work done. So being able to set those boundaries becomes really important for people and still get the opportunity, still get their work done.
Well, go ahead, Michael, please. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think that call, setting those boundaries starts at the top. You know, it's easy to fire off an email at 6:30, but it's just as easy to wait till 6:30 the next morning or 7 the next morning. You know, if you know somebody is what they're dealing with, and by now you should know what people are dealing with. You know, we have employees across the country, and I know where my single moms are. I know where my people who have parents and living with them are, and we check in with them and we make sure that, that they're doing okay. They're handling things well and they don't need things. And for some of the more junior people, a couple of times we've sent out cash and gas gift cards, if somebody had, cause it may not be, we didn't lose anybody due to COVID, but we don't know if spouses lost job or had hours cut. So we wanted to do something to reach out and let people know that even though they had not seen a salary cut, if they had somehow been impacted, that we wanted to help them. in some way. And we tried to keep that communication up throughout the pandemic, and continuing just to let them know that they have both our support and flexibility, and if they need anything, that they should reach out directly, and we're here to set them up for success, not to ridicule them because they have a unique situation.
I think we are actually getting to be at the end of the time, and we do have starting in about 10 minutes here our next event, which is the Scrum, the big discussion. So I want to give people a chance to break from that. And frankly, myself, I should go check and make sure the middle schoolers have actually got their math homework done, right? So there's our work-life imbalance that we all need to tend to. But I want to say, Misty, Michael, Kathy, thanks so much for being part of this today. It's been a great discussion. I've learned a lot. As I was saying, I'm undertaking research on this and the final stages of that. And I've actually picked up a great many things that I'd like to try to weave into what I'm working on. If you're interested more on this question, we'll be publishing here at the Center for Government Contracting a white paper on the subject before the end of the month, the end of the year. And you can find it on our website at George Mason. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you all again in about 10 minutes.
Great, yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Misty. Thanks, Kathy. Great discussion. As Jim mentioned, we're going to be doing a scrum after this in about 10 minutes, where we can continue the conversation all together. We got some follow-on points that we want to talk, but I'll just briefly sum up. So you guys can drop if you'd like, but I just want to briefly sum up the discussion today. I want to thank everyone for all their participation. And I want to thank particularly on my team, Charlie Dogus and Allison Langford, who were the engine behind this effort, all three modules, and on our huge partners at DAU, Kevin Linden and Larry Ferrara. They're the ones that help us identify the great speakers for this session. So it was great to partner with them. And just, I think we got some really strong points. There was a lot of interesting overlap in the discussion, which I thought worked well. And some of the practical points that we found, that there's an overwhelming consensus that a lot of this is going to stick, in terms of how we're approaching the work, the balancing of that, of in-person and remote, likewise with contract performance, flexibilities there. And just the overall spirit of innovation that Michael touched on. I think we're going to have a lot of that going forward. I think we're going to be surprised a little bit, though, much like the virus surprised us in March of this year. I think we're going to be surprised by how quickly the vaccine changes things in a positive way. So, but that's going to create other challenges, like you alluded to here. And I really want to dig into that in the post-scrum. So take a quick break, and we'll talk to you all on the back end.